I'm Nura Mowzoon. I'm Dr. Nura for a lot of people. And I did my graduate work in marriage and family therapy. So my master's and my PhD are both in marriage and family therapy. Once I got out of graduate school, I really decided that my passion was in the love relationship and the couple's dynamic.
Something that I grew up hearing, and I still hear all the time, is this concept of, you got to try each other out, basically, and to see if you're compatible. And, there's a fear that if you don't do that, if you wait to have sex or even do anything before marriage, that you're going to then get married and it's going to be a disaster. Mm-hmm. So I guess, what do you say to people who are nervous about that?
People use this incredibly romantic idea of like test driving a car before you buy it. But how many of us have taken a car out for a test drive, bought it, and then a couple months later, we're like, what was this? A test drive doesn't actually tell you that much, because when you're taking the car on the test drive, the car is at its optimal functioning. The people there, the car salesman, have made it perfectly beautiful, clean. Every little thing has been worked on so that it can be sold. It doesn't mean that it's actually a quality car. It means it's presenting well. The same thing happens in relationships. Just because the test drive goes well doesn't mean that this is how it's going to hold up the minute you take it off the lot. And if you're still in this like presentation mode, if you're still in the audition mode, you're going to make it a pretty great test drive. You're going to be like, I keep a perfectly clean house. I'm a fantastic cook and I love kale and I love to hike all the time. Like you're gonna put your best foot forward still, even if you're test driving it, because you want to be bought. I don't know how far I can take the metaphor, but it's still flawed. And then this idea of discovering sexual compatibility. Sexual compatibility is created. It isn't discovered. It's not like you each have two different pieces of a puzzle and you're going to see if they fit together or not. It's a reflection of your emotional connection. We really need to get away from this idea of discovering compatibility and realize that it's about creating compatibility. This is scientifically backed. This is not just to justify what people think is too traditional of thinking in terms of chastity before marriage. It's actually science backed. And so we have to realize we're not finding somebody else who fits us in that way. You create it based on your dynamic with each other. And frankly, if we're all doing it right, if we're all following the writings in the way that we're intended to, or that in the way that the writings are intended to be followed, there is no such thing as discovering compatibility, because you come together as blank slates and then you create your dynamic together. So if we're actually abstaining as the writings tell us to, there is nothing to discover. So let's also talk about that. If we're doing it the right way, you're not discovering anything. You're co-creating it.
Yeah, I love that. Co-creating the relationship. I've been thinking about, I'm sure you're familiar with Sex and the City, and the way that the show often portrayed, women taking control and getting in touch with their own bodies and all of this stuff, and like really diving deep more into sex outside of marriage. It's just being about sex. It became a lot of the conversation of this is what empowerment is. And then I've noticed this dichotomy of, especially for women, I'm thinking more about women, no, protection is in chastity, but empowerment is in the opposite of that, is in like going full force with the sex, whether I'm married or not, just discovering myself, right? And it just feels like two opposite sides, like I said, like maybe a false duality. And for me, just my own experience, I've been feeling like, no, I felt the most empowered as a woman when I leaned into chastity, because suddenly it was like I knew my own worth and I knew like my own value, and it wasn't tied into being chaste, but it was tied into setting strong boundaries, I think, is really what it comes down to. So yeah, I guess I'm just curious, what you think about chastity as an empowerment versus, protection. I guess you could think of it as a protection, just as any boundary is a protection. But I also think that empowerment is super important and needs to be talked about more, especially for young girls. Because I think if we just talk about protection with chastity, it can feel kind of like a wet blanket. It's just like, I don't want to be protected. I want to be fierce. You know, I see this a lot. And I think that if we kind of flip the script and we say, well, hey, like, this isn't just about protection. This is also empowerment for you as a young girl. Like, who do you want to be? You know, what do you want to be doing with your life? How do you want to show up in the world? And that includes sexually.
Yeah. I mean, I think it is the way that I'm hearing you talk about it. It's almost like the pendulum is swinging from one extreme to the other. I've never necessarily thought about it as empowerment, but I definitely see it. And I would say that rather than there being a false dichotomy, it's really two sides of the same coin. Mm-hmm. That on one hand, it is a protection. It is. And as much as people might think that it's kind of a wet blanket answer, it's a scientific answer as well. Not that it's scientific and a wet blanket, but there's actually science to it. Because again, sex is as great as it is because it's powerful. And it's powerful because it attaches to people in a way that nothing else can. It's like super glue. If you put super glue on something you're creating or fixing, it's the best thing for it. But if you accidentally get it like on your fingers or on something else, it's ruined. Scientifically speaking, it serves as a protection because it actually helps maintain a clear mind, like an actually clear, more objective mind. Because the minute you sexually bond, the chemicals prevent you from being objective. So in that sense, it is a protection, but it's also, as you said, it's also very empowering because I think the perfect word that you used was boundaries. Boundaries are profoundly empowering for anybody. When you say, these are my standards, these are my limits, and I expect you to respect them, that is an incredibly empowering move. I think in today's discourse, there's a lot of conversation about like being with who I want, when I want, however I want. It's empowering. And I can understand the thinking behind that. But again, it's a flawed premise because when the science contradicts that, then you're kind of in trouble. Like, yeah, okay, you do you. But just because you're doing what you want, when you want, with whoever you want, doesn't mean that the chemicals in your body have discernment all of a sudden. Your body is still going to do what it's going to do. And so you're not want yourself in this way.
I think what happens is people shut down from their bodies.
Yeah, that people think that they're above sex, that I can do
Yeah, and then they separate their bodies from like what's happening, like the emotions. And I don't know, I just wonder, like little t trauma, I guess I wonder like what's happening there if you're disconnecting completely from your body and from the experience and you're just having sex to have sex. I guess I wonder like what's going on and what would the ramifications be.
That could be its own conversation probably. But I think that's a fantastic point. Like disconnecting the two, how is that going to potentially work against you in the long run or even currently? Like there's a reason why our mind and our bodies are so synced up. And to force a separation, I don't think that we can fully. Even if we think we are, I don't think we can. And B, I don't think it's healthy. I have this conversation a lot with my students and with clients, but this comes up with students and like just generally the college population that I work with. As a woman, there is still a pressure to have sex, to not lose the guy. I get private messages about this all the time in my DMs. I get like, it's probably one of the most common questions and the most common dilemmas. A guy will walk if I don't have sex with him. I think this belief is very, very deeply embedded in most women's psyches. And rather than acknowledge that that's there, rather than acknowledge that I have a fear that the guy I'm interested in won't want to be with me, we try to change the conversation and instead say, well, no, I'm just empowered and I sleep with whoever I want, whenever I want, when really what's driving that is fear. And when you've got fear driving that, you're not empowered, you're terrified. They are not the same thing. So fear is at the steering wheel, but we're cloaking it in this empowerment thing because we don't want to feel bad about it. We don't want to acknowledge the fear. And so I think that there is something deeply empowering, again, about recognizing, well, if a man isn't going to stick around because I won't have sex with him, like, what are the bigger implications of a man who has that as a value? Are we going to be compatible in multiple ways? Is this a man who actually sees me for me? Or is this someone who wants what he wants, and if he doesn't get it, he's going to walk? And is that who you want as your future husband and the future father of your children? That little thing is actually an implication of something bigger. If he walks, maybe it's better for you. Like, if you have to rope him in by having sex with him, what does that say about the quality of your bond and of his values?
I think these are questions that a lot of people are asking. I think that last question that you asked is something that would be very helpful to ask when looking for a partner.
And again, it's easier, it's easier to have this discernment and detachment and walk away when you haven't bonded to them physically already. We don't understand the power of physical attachment and how much it keeps us in situations that we shouldn't be in.
I'm curious about men. Like, is that really what it means to have sex like a man? To be detached, like completely like detached, and like think that you're empowered through, like, I can have sex with you and drop you, and I can have sex with this person and drop you.
I think that is the expectation that we place on men, to be detached. I think we socialize our men to act this way. I think we socialize our men to act as if they don't care, they're detached, they don't get emotionally entangled, and it's just like, a one and done, and you don't need to like think about them again. But I reject that as actually being male nature. The attachment that comes with sex is not exclusive just to women. The hormones that are released that create attachment are released in both men and women. It's a little heavier on the women's side. It is still released in men. Men still feel attachment and bonds. And actually, there's a lot of research that shows that men fall in love faster and harder than women do. But we don't know that because society doesn't think that that's masculine. So I think fundamental to what you're saying is just this idea of actually, like, what is nature and what is socialized? What's nature, what's nurtured? So even this idea of having sex like a man, like, and this is unfair to our brothers out there, or to the men in our lives out there, that you should have sex and not care.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Like, God forbid you have emotions for somebody. God forbid you love someone and feel attracted and attached to them. It doesn't make you less of a man, but this is what our society would have them believe. So
yeah,
we've got to question and all of this and reject the stuff that is categorically untrue.